remember where we've been. Of course, the Jews were in bondage for 400 years in Egypt. Moses came at God's instruction and led them out. They came out of Egypt and traveled to the Sinai Peninsula, again, through the Red Sea. And God brought them to Mount Sinai. And as we have looked before, we saw that as Moses went up at Mount Sinai that was covered with clouds and lightning and everything, and God began to share with Moses the 10 Commandments and in other material. And the people, when they looked up and saw the lightning and heard the thunder and saw the clouds and everything, they were terribly afraid. And what did God say? He said, yeah, fear not. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of me. However, have a healthy respect. Have a healthy fear. You don't have to be afraid to the degree that you're running away, you're fleeing from me, but have the healthy respect. Again, I just have to keep drilling home the fact that these folks were not Bible students, Bible school students. I mean, these folks were pretty rough. Remember, they'd been in slavery for a long time. And, when they didn't have food, they grumbled. When they didn't have meat, they grumbled. When they didn't have this, they grumbled. And God was patient with them. God said, okay, we'll take care of that. Here's manna. Here's meat. Here's quail. Here's water. Whatever it was that they needed, God said, just kind of relax a little bit and everything's going to be fine. But they really didn't know, they really hadn't been taught who God was and what he expected of them. So now they're at Mount Sinai. God has given, the commandments and so forth, and now they're going to begin to get an understanding of what it was that God wanted from them. Earlier in the Old Testament, with Abraham and Isaac, we don't read much about their worship of God. We read that they made sacrifices. Abraham was called to sacrifice Isaac, remember, and God, intervened there, and he sacrificed a goat, and there were other sacrifices. There were other offerings that were made to God, but they really didn't have, as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they really didn't have a prescribed worship period or directions for worship in Abraham's time. And then, of course, you've got 400 years of slavery that would wipe out whatever they had done in the past. Now, why would you got to ask yourself, why would God bring the people out of slavery? He chose them, and what would be the idea? Just free them, and just like if you open the doors of a prison and let everybody run out, maybe go back to where they came from, and all of these people had been born in slavery, so where would they go? There were two reasons that God delivered the Israelites. The first was the idea of service. God wanted his people to serve him, to be in service to him, to take care of things. Again, not to scatter all over the Middle East, but to live together as a people and be able to serve and also worship God. We talked about the 10 Commandments and how the first 4 commandments taught the people what God expected of them. Thou shalt not have any other gods before me. Thou shalt not bow down to to another idol. Those commandments, and then commandments 5 through 10 were how you relate together. God wanted his people to be together, to live together. And we'll see, I hope we can see this. Again, another, I think, significant point here is the fact that they were never going to be able to live in the Garden of Eden. Okay? They weren't going to be able to have that type of a relationship because the people were still sinful. And there wasn't a way of, unless you wiped them all out and started from scratch again, there wasn't going to be a way that you could start, or you could have sinless people. So they weren't going to be able to have that Edenic experience. However, when we think of the promised land and what God had in hopes for his people, I think he was looking for an opportunity to have his people together. Remember the promises he made to them, that I'll take care of your enemies. We'll clear out that land. You don't have to do anything. Remember Jericho. What did they do at Jericho? They marched around, blew trumpets. God destroyed them. God was going to take care of them. He wanted a special relationship with his people. Well, we'll see how that went. But this is very important. This is just such an important time in history and what God wanted. So God brought the people to Sinai, and he spent 40 days with God, and came down, and he had to go back because of the golden calf thing the people had built. And so again, that's another story sometime. But basically, two things that God gave to Moses, and Moses would then share with the people. On Mount Sinai, first he gave them the what? Okay, 10 Commandments. We know that. Again, the first 4 was relating to God. The last 6 were relating to one another. Again, something that was going to be really important. We're talking about the building of a nation. So as we're on our trip to the promised land, God says, I want you to know what I expect of you. And I also want you to know what you should expect of one another. So that's the 10 Commandments. And then the second thing that he gave them, among some other commands, but a lot of time is devoted to the building of the tabernacle. And the tabernacle was the place that the people would learn how to worship God. Again, they weren't able to worship God really, much in when they were in Egypt. And of course, they've been walking for many days, and they hadn't been able to do a whole lot there. But God gave them some very direct instructions on how to build that temple, or that tabernacle. Was this the first promise that he gave to live with his people? No, he gave Abraham the promises. Remember, in the Abrahamic covenant, he said, I'm going to build my nation. And not only was he going to build his nation, not only was he going to go before them, but that he was going to dwell with them. Now, the question would be at that time, well, what was necessary? What was necessary for God to be able to dwell with his people? Any ideas? Dwight? They needed, I'm sorry? Well, okay, all right, that's necessary. But God really needed a place to dwell. Now, we understand that, we have a hard time with that because we understand that God is spirit, okay? All that worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. We understand that. We understand that the God's spirit is not something that can be contained, in a room or in a box or whatever. We understand that today. But remember, for a people like this, who were right at the beginning of their understanding of God, it was really necessary for them to have a place where God would be able to, what we would call his presence would dwell. Okay, I mean he's not in there sitting on a throne like a king, but a place where his presence would dwell. Even when David was talking about the fact that David was perplexed because he said, I have a beautiful house. I got a great place to live, but there's no place for my God to live. There's not a temple. There's no place for my God to dwell. And 2 Samuel 7:13, he's, David wasn't allowed, of course, to build the temple, but God said, he shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. That would be Solomon, who would be building that temple for God's presence to dwell. So even in David's time, which was, a long time after where we are today, God was still had that desire to have a presence with his people. Now, again, another picture of the tabernacle complex, and many of the pictures that you would see have, oh boy, you can't see it, but this would be where the Holy of Holies would be, where the Ark of the Covenant, you know what I'm talking about, and very often it's depicted as having this smoke, not smoke that's going from the ground up, but the smoke, kind of that pillar of cloud that would come from the sky down here. And so that let the people know that God was with them. Would that be a comfort to you? I think so. Just to be able to look and to see this cloud coming down from the sky. Can't even imagine that. But to know that the God was in your midst, and God was was blessing you, and he was going to lead and protect you. I mean, that would be a tremendous, tremendous blessing. So again, what would be necessary would be some kind of a dwelling place. And so God then gives instructions in these 15 or so chapters of Numbers, beginning again at 25 or 26, and tells them what would be necessary for them to build this tabernacle. And we'll look at one passage in just a second. But what's the difference between a tabernacle and a temple? Altogether? Temporary, yeah. As we're going to see, the tabernacle was designed to be to move, and of course a temple you couldn't do that with. And as we will see in the future, remember that the people, if we're not exactly sure where Mount Sinai is, but we're just assuming it's down here. Now, after they construct this tabernacle, then they're going to have to take it apart, and they're traveling all over the place for the next 40 years. Can you imagine? And imagine how many times you would have to take that tabernacle apart and construct all that. And, you think you just got it finished. Now we're going to be able to relax a little bit. And then the pillar begins to move. The pillar of smoke begins to move again. And now you got to take this all down and pack it up and get ready to move again. Just an amazing, amazing dedication that the people had. But again, that's what the tabernacle was for. So it's an amazing thing. Okay, here we are. Let's turn in your Bibles to Exodus. Let's look at 26. And just to give you an idea of, if you haven't read this before, or you probably skimmed over this before, but imagine now God is telling you that this is what you're going to have to build. This is what you're going to have to build. So listen up. He says, make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of finely twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, with cherubim worked into them by a skilled craftsman. All the curtains are to be the same size, 28 cubits long and 4 cubits wide. Join 5 of the curtains together and do the same with the other 5. Make hoops of blue material along the edge of the end curtain in one set, and do the same with the end curtain in the other set. Make 50 loops on one curtain and 50 loops on the end curtain of the other set, with the loops opposite each other. Then make 50 golden clasps and use them to fasten the curtains together so that the tabernacle is a unit. Skip over to verse 15. Make upright frames of acacia wood for the tabernacle. Each frame is to be 10 cubits long and 1.5 cubits wide, with 2 projections set parallel to each other. Make all the frames of the tabernacle in this way. Make 20 frames for the south side of the tabernacle, and make 40 silver bases to go under them. 2 bases for each frame, 1 under each projection. For the other side, the north side of the tabernacle, make 20 frames and 40 silver frames or bases, 2 under each frame. You feel like you've been to IKEA? Jeez. And it goes on for 15 chapters like this. So if your eyes did glaze at one point, I can certainly understand that. What's the point? What's the point? We'll look at that another time. What's the point? I think there's 2 points. One is, remember that we're dealing with a people that may have had some skilled craftsmen. There may have been some people that had worked in a goldsmith area in Egypt, but most of the people were laborers. And so now God is needing to be very specific when he tells them what to do. He wouldn't just say, okay, build a frame for this thing. And he's giving them very specific instructions. And I think also, perhaps more so, is that it's reflecting the holiness of God. And he's letting them know that this isn't something that you're just going to be able to slap together and put 4 wheels on it, and we're just going to wheel it every time we have to move. This is really serious stuff. You're going to need to get exactly what it is that I'm telling you. You're not going to be able to substitute anything else. And so they would have, they would have had to be moving this fairly regularly, and they would have it for at least 40 years. So that you'd have to be updating things. Imagine taking, apart your IKEA dresser, taking that apart every couple months or every year, and then trying to put it back together and have everything fit, have all the tolerances the same. You'd have to, you had to continue to modify that. This is serious stuff. What strikes you? As you look at this, what strikes you about these instructions and what strikes you about the tabernacle and the importance of it. Again, the tabernacle was going to be the place that you can see the holiest place in the Ark of the Covenant. That's where the dwelling of God was going to be. Well, I think, for me, one of the things that strikes me is the fact that God calls his people, or when he calls his people, he's not looking, again, for a half-hearted response. I mean, he's looking for us to be serious about serving him. When we, something as simple as coming to worship. When we come to worship on a Sunday morning or whenever it is that we come, how is that reflecting God's holiness? I mean, how do you prepare yourselves? Forgive me for this slide. If I offend some of you, I'm sorry. But it just kind of, and if some of you don't understand it, that's great. We're proud of you for that. But seriously, when we do decide to come to church, and for some people, it's not a every Sunday experience. For some people, it's it's a nice day, it's a rainy day, so I'll go to church. For some people, we don't have something standard. It's not a regular process. It's not something that we build into our schedule. I was talking to, I had a funeral last night, and talking to somebody there, and talking about how, their family used to get together every Sunday, and I always love that, about the Italians. The Italians love to get together and have the Sunday supper, and it sounds just like a wonderful thing. I always, sometimes wish I was born into an Italian family. I just think that would be a wonderful thing. And, and he said, it's too bad that instead of going, just visiting our relatives, that we just made it a regular practice of coming to visit God and be in his presence, for a couple hours on a Sunday morning. Why can't, why can't people get in that habit? We can serve spaghetti if that would help. I don't know, but but there are just so many half-hearted efforts, and sometimes that can be on our part. I mean, that can be on the worship leader's part, that can be on my part. Maybe sometimes I have those half-hearted efforts as well. But, I need to put my all into it. And it's not just me, but every one of us, as we come to worship, we have to put our all into it. We have to prepare our hearts, we have to prepare our minds, and be ready to have God speak to us. What is it? What does it mean? What does this all mean? Again, personally, it means that I have to look at my own worship, my own service to God. Why did God save me? Why did God save any of you? He loves us, yeah. But in the same way that God saved the Israelites, he could have loved the Israelites and kept them in Egypt. He could have, there's a lot of things that he could have done. But he pulled the Israelites out of Egypt, Remember, for those two things, look at your notes, for service and for worship. All right, now, if he brought us salvation so that we could serve him or worship him, how are we doing with that? You know, have we, you know, and I'm afraid I know the answer for some people. And that's the idea of coming to church and then having the choir, having the praise band, having Pastor Jim fill my basket so I can go home and, you know, make it through until the next week. Do you see that any place in the scriptures? No. I mean, we come together to, and at least this is we come together to worship and to learn, to study together. All right? Now, but that's my part. That's the team's part, is that we need to lead you in worship. We need to lead you in Christian education. But then it's up to you. It's up to every one of us to, again, use the gifts that God has given to us to be able to serve him. So in the application, I think for me, there's a personal application that I need to be daily worshiping. I need to be daily serving. I need to be looking every day for ways in which God is calling me to serve. If you're not doing that, then we're going to have problems with the second application. And that would be the corporate part. We look at the ministry of our church. You know, here we are. God has brought together a people for what? To serve and to worship. He didn't just bring us here so that we can be here for an hour and then leave. You know, the same thing with God calling the Israelites. God called every one of us for a purpose, and that's, again, looking at the fact that we have as our mission statement the idea of sharing the good news, sharing the love of Jesus Christ with those in our community and in those outside. Can we fulfill the mission of the church when 50% of the people are serving? If Michigan State gets on the court and they decide, well, we're just going to use 3 players today and another guy on crutches, what's going to happen? They're going to get killed, yeah. There just isn't any way that it's going to happen, and they're going to be eliminated. How can we expect to fulfill what God wants for us if we're bringing half a team? So will you help us?